Okay, let's talk about overlapping and creating depth in your journal or your work. On this journal page, you have the foreground, the midground, and the background. The foreground is the camper, the midground is the hills, and the background is the clouds or the sky and the sun. In real life, this is what it looks like. Trees in the front, midground is the barn, and background is the sky. In this one, it's the flowers, and then a tree, and then a cow. The next picture in real life is outside the studio. So there are flowers in the front, a bird bath, and then a tree swing, and then the background. So creating that in your artwork, I'm going to start with some squares. Well, they're not squares, they're rectangles. Generally, what we think about doing when we're drawing is putting something beside something else. When you're doing overlapping as composition, you will overlap one image on top of the other, which means you're going to draw the first image and then put the other one behind it. Now, I'm having to do it backwards to show you this, but you would draw or create the image on the right and then draw the other one around it, and that middle image is about a third of across the front. This image, these two squares, are about halfway. The front one is about halfway covering the back one. And again, what would happen is these front two pieces, you would draw those first, then you would add the back to peek out around it. It's like you tuck things behind each other. So these are some squares. They're not really squares. They're, like I said, more rectangles because I like that better than I did squares. And I'm going to show you an easy way to physically, in a tactile way, overlap and create what's called overlapping squares in composition. And you can do overlapping squares, you can do overlapping circles, any shape you want to do. And this is a type of collage. And the composition for this type is again called overlapping. And what that does is it allows you to create depth in your artwork, in the picture that you're creating. Now, if you're drawing, like I said, you're going to draw the first image in the front, and then you're going to tuck everything sort of peeking out from behind it. To do this, some of these are pieces from one of the other videos, and I'll drop a link to it in here, about creating muted colors. So the lighter ones are the muted colors that I created, and some of the darker ones are the ones that I went back and did another set because I just had fun doing it and needed to do it again, and I made them a little bit darker. So I'm using gel medium to glue these down. You can use, you could use a glue stick, you could use Mod Podge, pretty much anything you have. You could even use tape. And what you're going to see me do in a few minutes is use something called dimensionals, or they're little pieces of foam that are adhesive on both sides, and that allows you to even have more depth when you're creating something like this. So I'm just going to arrange these on this paper, and the first ones I'm putting down are the background. And then I'm going to come back and add some on top, and I'm just going to do this really, really simply and straightforward so it's easy to see. Now this is the way you do it if you're using collage papers, if you're wanting to create depth on a piece that you're working with, and instead of drawing it, like I said, you're collaging this to create this overlap effect. And when I get to the overlap portion of this, you're going to see how it creates a dimensional element to it, and it looks pretty cool. Okay, now I'm going to take another piece, and this is where I'm going to start the overlap. I'm just going to overlap it right on top of the other two pieces to give it a little bit of depth. And I'm about a third of the way over. This one was not halfway across the back pieces. It's only about a third or a quarter of the way. And yes, these are all kinds of crooked, but you know what? I like crooked. Crooked's good. The dimensionals that I just talked about, they're like triangles, squares, things. That's what I'm using now. I'm going to pop a couple on the back of a couple of these pieces, and now I'm going to go into more overlapping and put a couple more on here. So as you can see, it creates this depth. So the first one I put on created a little bit of depth because it was just flat, but it was laying over the other two pieces. The second one I put on, because it has the dimensionals behind it, is creating more depth because of that. This last one I'm going to put on just horizontally, just for fun, and then we will jump into another way of doing this. And here you can see I popped it in a frame just for the fun of it to see what it would look like. Okay, let's move on to what happens when you want to draw overlapping and create depth in your work. And I'm just going to draw some really simple flowers, nothing fancy. And you can see even with this, I'm overlapping the petals, or actually that's probably not petals, but it's the middle section of the flower. I'm overlapping those as I go. So I put a circle in the middle, and then I did half circles all the way around and made it look like they were sitting on top of each other. So I'm going to do the same thing as I'm drawing the rest of this, and you'll see what happens when I make mistakes and have to erase. But you'll also see how it looks when you start tucking things in behind. It gives you a layered effect. And to give you an example of real flowers and layering, this is what it looks like from the side. And then this one is what it would look like if you were looking at it straight on. You can see how the petals are layered on top of each other and they're peeking out from under. So that's what I'm going to be doing with this picture of just basic little flowers. So I just tucked the leaves behind that one little flower, and now I'm going to do another flower below, and this is going to be facing down. So the petals are going down, and then there's tucking behind this other flower up on the right hand side. This is really hard to narrate, y'all. So that little area underneath the flower that holds it all together, holds the where it connects to the stem. No, I have no technical terms for any of this, but that is tucked up under that flower up on the right, and then these are the petals that are in the background from this flower facing downward. And you're going to see in a minute that I'm drawing the stem down behind the other flower. Again, this is overlapping and it's causing depth in the picture. And I'm going to show you in a minute how you can cause even more depth in your picture by shading. So I'm going to draw that stem down a little further, and then I'm going to tuck in, or I'm going to put a couple of leaves, and this one I'm tucking behind that main flower. Now I'll be drawing and I can't remember, it's kind of like a cone flower, and they're kind of a struggle for me to draw. So I'm thinking I want to start with kind of the inner pieces where they're about to, what's that word? Bloom. That's a good word. And I'm putting a little bit of a stem in just so I'll have something to work with, kind of to hang them on. And these are all just upside down, right side up triangles, back and forth, Really easy to create, really easy to do, and they overlap each other also. So all you can really see on this coneflower type thing, I don't think it's a coneflower. I don't remember what it's called. Somebody tell me in the comments what it is, because I can't remember. But anyway, they're bluey purple. Okay, I digress big time. But you can see I'm tucking each little petal somewhat under the one above it. And again, this is overlapping, and it causes dimension and depth, and it allows your work to be more of a fuller piece and easier to look at. And it's not so childlike or naive. Art is amazing, but we don't always want to do that. So adding depth and overlapping your work is what keeps it from appearing childlike. So I'm going to go back in now, and you're going to watch me tuck the top of that stem in so it connects to that flower and it's not just hanging randomly. Okay, let me see if I can point out. So there's the circle, there's the half circles around it like we saw in the flower. There's the petals, and then here are the pieces, the other petals that are tucking in behind, so you get that overlap. You also have the overlap with that cone flower in the background, the overlap with the little things in the middle and those petals, and then you have the background petals, and then even that front one is sort of overlapping the others. So there's a lot going on, but keeping it as simple as possible, there's a lot of overlapping, and you can see the depth and dimension in these pictures, and you can see how easy it is. So for contrast, really quickly, I want to show you what is not overlapping. This is definitely not overlapping. It's very side by side, very spaced out, not overlapping. There's no depth or no dimension. It's just flat. This one is the same way. These images are side by side. They're touching, but they're not overlapping.